And thank you to all of the organizers of World Unity Week. It is an honor and a thrill to be included in this event that spans the world and to be among some of the greatest thinkers, field experts, and connectors on our planet. My name is Katie Ginsberg. I live in New York, where I raised 3 children and where I founded a not-for-profit called the Children's Environmental Literacy Foundation, which we call SELF for short. I'm here to share my story, which I hope will contribute to the efforts and goals of this week's programs. I never imagined that I would be leading a not-for-profit environmental education organization. Until I was in middle school, I had no doubt I would be traveling through space as a computer engineer on a space station. I poured through every National Geographic and Omni magazine and books from the library on the technicalities of space exploration and pathways to becoming an astronaut. Star Wars was the movie that exhilarated me the most and was the source of hours of daydreaming during my hours of time spent outside. And I spent many, countless hours outdoors. I grew up outside of Chicago in a city called Evanston, Illinois. It's a large urban area near Lake Michigan. My street had buses passing my house every hour, and there was a forest preserve across the street too. This is where my friends and I spent most of our summertime exploring, playing, climbing trees, building forts, daydreaming. It's where I felt most connected to the natural world. And this has stuck with me. My parents were both musicians. My mother still is. Music was a huge part of my life. It was literally part of every day of my childhood, as my mother taught piano out of our home and my dad taught piano at Northwestern University. They performed together and as solo artists. My father made recordings, but what they loved most was teaching. And there were many hours of dinner conversations about good pedagogy, different ways of teaching for different kinds of students, and all kinds of discussion that meant very little to me until many years later. Fast forward to my first career out of college, where, by the way, I did not study computer engineering or anything remotely related to becoming an astronaut and flying on a space station. In fact, I studied psychology. And that led to a career, my first career, in marketing and advertising. I learned more about detergents than one could ever imagine wanting or needing to learn about detergents because I worked for an international company that made detergents for around the world. Part of my job as an account manager was to learn all about the ingredients in the detergents that we were creating campaigns for. And so that meant we went across the Hudson River to an R&D building where we met with a lot of the designers and the chemists who would make these detergents. Part of the education that we needed to have was learning about what these products looked like and were made with in other markets around the world. And it was one of the first aha moments in my early adult life about the ways that products are made, how they impact our health, and how they impact the health of the planet. And that came about when I learned that this product I was creating campaigns for in the United States was made with very different ingredients for the same product that was sold in Europe. And we learned about the ingredients that were being used here in the US as ones that were not particularly healthy, either for ourselves or for our environment. And it made me question. Fast forward a few years later, working in advertising and marketing was not conducive. The hours were not conducive to raising a family, at least the way that I wanted to raise mine. So I left the industry to raise my family and became very, very focused on something that had stayed with me all those years later, which was all the time I spent outside. And that became a priority for me as a parent to ensure that my 3 children spent as many hours as I did, if not more, in the natural world and just unscheduled with unfettered, imaginative, wonderful play in nature. Um, so I didn't allow much TV. I didn't allow much screen time at all, nor was there really the same kind of exposure that we have today to screens. So it was a little easier in those times to engage them in outdoor play away from screens. My eldest was a wonderfully easy child who loved school. And all 3 of them had the ability to actually walk to school, which was wonderful for them to start and end the day walking through the woods behind my house here in New York that are similar to the ones that I grew up with in Evanston, a little different, but close enough to their elementary school such that they could walk and see and experience all of the myriad little details that are in our natural world. When my oldest son was in 4th grade, he came home one day. It was Earth Day, and he could not have been more excited about that experience that they offered to the students that day when they explained that they would not be having regularly scheduled classes. Rather, they were inviting the students to become environmental detectives. And their assignment was to explore the school and the school grounds to identify environmental impact areas. That was a very new concept to all of these 4th graders. But they were excited by this challenge, and essentially we're walking around the building to identify where things like leaking faucets existed, where classrooms were lacking recycling bins, where lights were left on or computers left on when they could be off, where there was litter around the campus, where there were invasive species, and most importantly, what they could do in terms of solutions for these issues that they were identifying. So it was an exciting moment for my son to come home and to have been given this power to not only explore his school in a new way, but to have been invited by his teachers and by the administration to offer up solutions, ideas, creative ways of addressing the problems that were identified by the entire 4th grade. And so he soon became our own household environmental police. And we were thrilled to see the excitement and to see the action that our son was taking, not only in our house to make our own home more environmentally friendly, but a lot of conversations that he would have with other adults about this experience he had in school. And so it was that day that was a bit of a watershed moment for me as a mother to recognize that this day, Earth Day, created this transition for my son that quickly set him off on a very exciting new path. And then Earth Day was over, and so too were the discussions in class about these ideas the 4th grade had about solutions to the issues. And that too was an aha moment for me to think that if we are only addressing these problems once a year on Earth Day in our schools, how can we possibly begin to think about how to resolve these increasing global and local environmental issues? So I set off on a mission. It wasn't a mission to join a space station, but it was a mission to save our own planet. And it was a mission to find how we could address that through a different way of thinking about education. and particularly early education, when I saw the power of what a fourth grade could do when they learned about something they cared about deeply and were empowered with the opportunity to do something about it. So that began my journey of looking for examples of where education for sustainability existed around the world in different countries where this was not just addressed once a year. It was not addressed only in an after school club or in a special class, but was in fact addressed every day as part of the core curriculum. And so I learned very quickly that, in fact, there were countries in 2000 and even prior to the year 2000 where education for sustainability was being used as the context for teaching and learning across kindergarten through 12th grade and even younger in preschool. And the reason being that some of these departments of education and countries recognized how important it is for children to feel connected to nature, to their place, to their community at a very young age, and to continue to nurture that connection through every discipline, through every experience that they have in their primary and secondary education. And that became the framework for what I then pursued to begin as a not-for-profit organization here in New York to attract teachers, administrators, and school communities to look at these other examples of what education might look like here in the United States, and beginning in my home area of the Lower Hudson Valley region. I quickly became a recruiter of experts who could help me put together and create this not-for-profit, the Children's Environmental Literacy Foundation, with people from the corporate world, from the legal profession, from education, and other fields who likewise saw the importance and, in fact, an imperative to bring education for sustainability into our schools and into our student learning. So in 2003, I founded the Children's Environmental Literacy Foundation with the goal to reach as many teachers as we could, thinking back on those early conversations that I overheard at the kitchen table with my parents about good pedagogy and about what it means to approach teaching with best practices that could be transformational for all kinds of learners from all kinds of schools. We began to collect different schools that were interested in bringing this to their teachers. And the strategy for our organization is to use professional development as the pathway to reach as many students as we can, because we recognize that when a teacher has thought about new ways of framing his or her own curriculum through the lens of sustainability is when we have this incredibly exciting opportunity to reach not just one student, but anywhere from 25 to 150 students every year, and every year subsequently. So our first programming began with a summer institute, and we had 38 incredibly creative, committed kindergarten through 12th grade teachers participate in that first summer institute. Since then, in 2005, SELF has reached nearly 15,000 teachers and over 1 million students, and not just in New York, but in California, in Illinois, in New Jersey, Connecticut, Texas, and elsewhere across the United States. In 2010, we became partners with the New York City Department of Education, where they had recently launched an official program called the Office of Sustainability out of their facilities and management department. They recognize the opportunity with having over 1,100 school buildings in the city of New York to use those buildings as places to reduce their carbon footprint and contribute to the success of Plan YC, which is a carbon reduction plan put in place by Mayor Bloomberg in the late 2000s. As part of the work that the Department of Education was doing with regards to the campuses and facilities, they recognized the opportunity for learning that came with that. And so we came on as a partner for professional development in teaching teachers throughout New York City ways of looking at their schools as a context for bringing in some of the big ideas of sustainability. What are those big ideas? So some of them are obvious, such as interdependence and long-term thinking. And others might be somewhat less obvious, like ecological economics. Being grounded in place and having connections to multidisciplinary teaching and learning are also very big components of our field, education for sustainability. And those are the concepts that we use when we're working with teachers to help think about how they might rethink and reframe their curriculum to connect their students' learning, not just with standards that are mandated by every state, but with ways that the students can feel as connected to nature and to their community as my own son did back in that 4th grade Earth Day experience that he had. Since 2010, we have worked with over 50 schools in the New York City Department of Education. And because of the success those schools have had in bringing their students outside of the classroom to learn the same geography or geometry lessons that they would perhaps normally learn on a whiteboard, but can easily be taught in a garden or on the streets of New York in a way that is much more meaningful to the students and in a way that will be much more memorable for the students. Those successes led to being introduced to the Los Angeles Unified School District in 2012. And there too, we have been working with some of the most creative teachers in some very challenged schools where resources are not abundant, but creativity is. And it is in that context where students, teachers, administrators, and parents come together and identify opportunities in their communities where there are ways to teach and learn math, science, English language arts, foreign language, physical education, health, social studies, global studies, basically any content that is relevant to a K-12 learning experience, and utilize those opportunities to help their students feel connected and feel empowered by action that they can take, not just on their schools, but in their communities. This experience in Los Angeles and in New York then translated into a very exciting opportunity for SELF to grow into a new market in Houston, Texas. And collectively, all of these markets with all of these schools that are in vastly different and a huge variety of settings has provided us with the opportunity to think about students and what they can contribute as civic scientists. So one of SELF's programs is a program that middle and high school teachers participate in, again, from across disciplines, to bring these ideas of civics, science, data collection, data analysis, and most importantly, the opportunity for students to present their findings in an authentic way to community decision makers in effort to have their voices heard, to have people connected and committed to what the students have presented as their solutions to issues around air quality, climate change, soil quality, water conservation. Name the issue and it can be addressed. And when it's addressed by a young person and or by young people together collectively, people listen and decision makers listen, because it is often those young people who present the most innovative, out of the box solutions that we adults might not see, because it comes from a very different place and different perspective, untainted by years of this is the way we do things. No, this is new ways of imagining, reimagining how life can function on this planet so that there's greater equity for everyone to share the resources that are so limited. So we have been so excited to see our civic science program grow in these different markets, and really most buoyed by the teachers that we've been working with since 2005, but in particular this past very challenging year, when teachers have had to throw balls in the air and catch them and collect everything that they can from their inner strength to go into these hybrid learning platforms that were all new to many teachers a year ago. And now they've become experts in utilizing technology and often finding technology that they don't otherwise have to connect with their students and keep them continuously learning. For us, it has been amazing, nothing short of amazing, to see what teachers have been able to accomplish in this most challenging year. And it buoys our spirits to know that these professional teachers are so committed as we are to the mission of educating for sustainability. We see so many of these teachers recognizing that there are different ways of considering how we think of ourselves as connected to nature. And one of the examples that was shared with me several years ago at a conference I attended by a group of Native American educators was when they had asked a group of students to draw what they consider to be a beautiful picture of nature, and asked the same of a group of students who were in a traditional classroom in some city, in some place in our country. The pictures that came from that question varied dramatically. The group of Native American students had pictures of trees and clouds and flowers and plants and people and animals. And it was an all-inclusive rendering of every living being you could imagine. Some drew pictures from the forest, some drew pictures from the stream. The other students likewise drew beautiful pictures of all kinds of nature that in their minds represented forests and oceans, streams. The biggest difference between these pictures were one thing that was missing in the students' pictures from the traditional classrooms, and that was us. It was people that were not in the pictures of nature that the students in the traditional classrooms had provided. And I think that's telling of how so many consider who we are in this world of nature and how we are either disconnected or absolutely inextricably connected as part of nature. Another thing that stuck with me from that same conference, also presented by a Native American speaker, was how they think about a term that we hear often, and that's natural resources. They were talking about their native language and how there is no equivalent in their native language for natural resources. They asked us, and there were probably at least 500 people in the room who thought very deeply about the question they posed, which was, what if instead of thinking about natural resources, we thought about our natural relatives? Would we treat them differently than we do when we think of them as natural resources? And that has stuck with me since that question was posed, and is very much a part of what education for sustainability strives to do, is to help bring about a new way of thinking that's non-derivative, that comes from our hearts, from our minds, and from our hands in terms of what we do with these next decades to come, for our students, for our children, for our schools, and for our communities. And there is nothing more powerful than learning from people from other places around our planet, as I did in the early days of forming this organization. And so, what World Unity Week is doing is nothing short of remarkable, to connect everyone, to strive to find the same things we share, which is at the core of successful sustainability. When we find that and recognize and agree, they are, in fact, the same things that we all need and we all share. And that is what will take us forward.